Good morning. So if you've not seen that movie, I don't always recommend every movie. If you haven't seen I Can Only Imagine, you need to watch that movie. That is a great one. I think it was even on Netflix recently, somebody told me, so if you have Netflix, but a bunch of different ways to watch it. But today we're going to talk about this idea of sorrow as we look in Luke chapter 22. And Luke chapter 22 is a pivotal section. And we're going to talk about part of it today. I'm going to talk about more of it with my small group tonight that I have here at 5. And there's no way to cover everything that's in this chapter. But what I want to cover is this idea of sorrow where we blow it, where we mess up. So I want to go back to what I talked to the kids about and talk about bandages, different kind of bandages. And how many of you have ever worked on a construction site? Okay, I see my friends there. So one of the things you learn on a construction site is that there are no bandages available. Maybe OSHA wants you to, but there is duct tape. And so my dad was a contractor, and so many times, I had a duct tape bandage. And I'll never forget the one day that I actually cut the end of this finger off with a radial saw, and I got paper towels and duct tape that day, and on the way to the hospital. But so here's the thing: that is not what you want to do long term. And the truth is, you temporarily put duct tape on there, basically to keep you from bleeding to death on the job site or getting blood on the wood that you're putting on the wall or whatever, And don't mess up my floor. I've actually been told that while I'm bleeding. So. Sometimes by myself, other people too. But hopefully what you do is you go home and then you cleanse the wound, right? And then you put maybe a real Band-Aid on it. Or in my case, listen, when you've had a lot of surgeries, when you have these at the house and this at the house to wrap, and I see nodding. That's not good. If you're nodding... It is, and if you have no idea what I'm holding up, good for you. We're proud of you. Hopefully you never do. So, I've had wound vacs and everything else. And here's the truth. Listen, some of you, because you've gone through trauma and you've gone through difficulty, you had to duct tape sorrow. But sometimes you have to do that just to get through what's going on. It's too much. But there needs to come a point as a Christian that you take whatever that sorrow is, and we're going to talk about 3 kinds of sorrow today. Of course, there's the sorrow of death too. We'll talk about that at some point, but that's not really our focus today, although this message applies to that too. And it's the idea that when you're going through it, it may be okay to wrap it with duct tape just to survive and walk through it. But over time, if you don't deal with the duct-taped area, I've got several people from Saturday night that are here today, and you are messing with me because I'm looking around, I'm like, wait, what? This is Sunday morning, right? Okay, anyway, so no, I'm glad you're here, but I'm glad you're here. But if you wrap it and you don't deal with it, it's going to get infected, it's going to be worse. And I, as a pastor, talk to people about all kind of things. And sometimes when I'm talking to people who are bitter or frustrated or they just are constantly walking in anxiety, sometimes, not always, but sometimes what they're really dealing with is one of these sorrows that we're going to talk about today. And so today I want you to think about these 3 sorrows, and I want you to think about what the first point talks about. It's the idea of surrendering it to Christ. Let Him work with you. Now, you may need other help too. God gave us friends, He gave us counselors, He gave us other people to help us when we get stuck, right? Because we all get stuck sometimes, right? And that's why there's Weight Watchers, right? Right? So was that too close to home? That really, you guys reacted. So let's talk about today how Jesus understands your sorrow. And for some of you, this may be a painful message because you've been wrapped in duct tape a long time. And you've not dealt with some of the sorrow you've experienced. And so if that's you, if one of these points today kind of hits close to home, listen, just know God has a way of dealing with us over time and opens our hearts to be ready to walk through it. So that's my prayer for you today. So here we go. Jesus understands your sorrow. Now, Luke 22, Lord's Supper's in here. We're not going to talk about that today. Judas betrayal, we are going to talk about that. A lot of other kind of critical areas are in here, but we're going to look mainly at 3 times in this passage where we see where there's betrayal, where there's hurt, where there's sorrow. So let's look at them. Number 1, the sorrow of betrayal. Now, if you have never had somebody close to you all of a sudden turn on you, or somebody who you thought was close to you, and all of a sudden you hear them say something and you go, oh. If you haven't had that happen yet, good for you. You're 4. Because the truth is, if you live very long, at some point, somebody who you thought was your friend, you're going to find out was using you. Somebody you thought was reliable, you had to do some construction in your home, and you find out they're not. Somebody you had work on your car that you trusted, all of a sudden you go, oh no. Or somebody who you trusted to be reliable is lying about you. And so as we look at this today, I want you to take that, whatever that incident is, and just put it on the cross today with Jesus. Here we go. And Judas went to the chief priest and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. I love this. They were delighted. It sounds like every bad guy in every movie. It's the moment that Scar in The Lion King is making evil plans. You're just like, whoa. And they were delighted that they would turn on Jesus. And then it continues. And agreed to give him money. Boy, isn't that... Remember, the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not the money. Money's neutral. But the love of money, if you really care about money, if money becomes your focus, if money becomes your God, then what happens is you will betray other people based on money. You'll hurt people based on finances. But he says they offered to give him money. He consented, and he watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them. Now listen to this, with no crowd present. Why? Because remember, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, when Lazarus came back to life, everybody said, hey, wasn't that guy dead? Did you guys hear? And everybody came after. And the Jews, the religious leaders, by the way, they were also political leaders. Okay? The religious leaders, which were also political leaders, and I'm sorry for my friends who I love that are attorneys, but they were also legal scholars. Boy, doesn't this sound familiar? It really, be careful who you trust, right? They loved power. They loved control, but they knew that they couldn't listen to the crowd because the crowd would be mad about this, so they had to get Jesus separate. Why? So they could do a sham trial. And that's what happens soon. While he was still speaking, this is talking about Jesus, it switches near the end of this chapter. A crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? What's really cool is when they ask Jesus if he's him, he says, I am, which is what God says at the beginning. And it says that the guards all fell over when he said that. Did you ever read that? It was the Benny Hinn moment in the Bible. And they all fell over. And you would think at that point, when you fall over when Jesus says something, that you'd be like, I want to go home. And if that didn't do it, you would think when they cut off his ear and he puts it back on, that at least the guy who had the ear replaced would be like, yeah, I'm going home. But that's not what happened. So Judas does what? He betrays him. What does betray mean? It means that he turned him over to them. This word in the Greek is this idea of betrayal, where he was on one side and he said, Jesus, here. And if you've ever been betrayed, you know that feeling. That feeling that, and somebody told me last night, they said, when my friends have betrayed me or somebody betrayed me and it was so obvious, they did me a favor. And the truth is, all of us know, and we can look back in our history at people who turned on us, and you see that you reap what you sow, don't you? By the way, if you've been around long enough, you start to go that. And I remember years ago when something happened, Harold Brantley saying to me, Eric, don't get mad. Just let Jesus work it out. He always takes care of it. And I can look back now over my life and all those years, it was about 15 years ago that Harold Brantley told me this, and I remember thinking, I wish that was true. But I look now, and I'm not envious of anybody who betrays other people. So when you see that happen, and there's something in you that says, maybe I should be more like that. That person seemed to prosper for a time. They seem to have the advantage. They seem to be moving forward. There's something really wrong. And when you find that that happens, what you need to do instead is say, Lord, examine my heart. Make sure that I'm not carrying bitterness against that person. You know, it's amazing. Jesus talked to Judas. You know what's even more amazing? Jesus knew this was happening, and in between these two, you know what Jesus did? He washed Judas's feet. I don't know about you, but I would have skipped Judas. I would have been like, yeah, Peter, yeah, Mark, you never mind, Thomas, right? It's amazing to me that Jesus walked in love, even with betrayal. So can you surrender your pain to Jesus? If somebody hurt you, if you still grit your teeth when you think about them. Now listen, don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying forgive and forget. There's nowhere in the Bible that it says forgive and forget. People talk about that all the time. And maybe if you're ADD like me, you do forget things. But the truth is, God made us so we remember things so that we don't repeat them. So if you walk up to somebody and they swing a baseball bat at you, please remember to duck next time. And so forgiving doesn't mean that you don't remember, and forgiving doesn't mean, listen, it doesn't mean that you say what they did is okay. The Bible's very clear about Judas, to the point that one of the authors says Satan came into Judas. I love that. It's like, whoa, that's a bad day, right? I'm glad you're trying to talk to me. It's very sweet. So here's the thing. If you right now are gritting your teeth over somebody who hurt you, and it may have been 10, 20, 30, 40, or more years ago, 40 years is a long time, but people carry anger that long. It may be that you need to say, Jesus, what happened to me was horrible. What they did was wrong. But Lord, I'm not going to keep playing this tape over and over again. By the way, one of the things I've noticed when I replay hurt and pain, it's the same story every time. And what's amazing when you replay it, it hurts again. Some of you this morning, as I'm talking about it, are like, oh, Lord, I surrender that to you. Lord, you took all that on the cross, so I'm going to surrender it to you. You know, in that video clip, Bart is carrying around the anger against his dad. By the way, one of the things I know about people who've been abused, if you ask them about it, they'll tell you horrible stories and not have any emotion about it. I've talked to people who had terrible childhoods, and they talk about it like it's normal. And here's why. Because to them, it was normal. What do you mean your dad chased you with a gun? That's horrible. Really? What do you mean you went to school with welts all over your legs? That's terrible. Oh, huh. And they never think about it. And so it could be that you're carrying something and you don't even realize. Regardless of what that is, you say, Lord, I surrender that to you. Number 2, let's keep going. The sorrow of failure. Let me tell you what failure's like. We all fail. We all mess up. We all blow. You ever say something you wish you hadn't said? Like it comes out of your mouth and you're like, and so, and I do that a lot, so it's a real easy one for me. Here's what failure's like. I don't know if you, years ago, so boats used to not have ladders. Very rarely they had ladders. And they never had little places that you could get on, little in the back. And so you'd go skiing, or you'd go tubing, or you'd go kneeboarding, or you'd go whatever the thing you were doing, getting pulled behind the boat, or your dad just decided to throw you out, whatever. And you'd come swimming up to get in the boat. And it was too high to even reach the edge. So you kind of went up and went, and you hoped that somebody was in there. And if you had somebody who cared about you, you know what they did? They reached over and they grabbed you. By the way, if you go whitewater rafting, it's the same way. If you've never done that, I love whitewater rafting. That's so much fun. I will not ride on Pirates of the Caribbean because the drop drives me crazy, but I will go whitewater rafting. I am a weird person. Don't even like roller coasters, but man, I love whitewater rafting. But here's what I know about whitewater rafting. You can't get back in. You cannot get back in unless one of your friends decides they're going to get you, and they have to grab you by your life jacket, and they have to fall backwards. And you become really close friends at that point. You're belly flopping on somebody. That's exactly what it's like when you fail. You can't pull yourself up. When you have an addiction, when you have a habit, when you have a hurt that's just deep inside of you, there's many times you can't do a thing about it other than say, help. Lord, help me. One of my favorite pictures is Peter underwater and Jesus reaching down. Listen to what happens next. This is at the Lord's Supper. Jesus looks over at Peter, calls him Simon. Simon Peter is his name. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. What's interesting is he's always called Peter the rock, and here he calls him Simon. Isn't that interesting? You're not feeling particularly strong that day, are you? But I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, listen, strengthen your brothers. Now this is cool. This is Jesus giving him hope after the failure. He's saying one day you're going to get your act together and then you're going to be able to help other people. By the way, I think Jesus says that to all of us. One day you're going to overcome your alcohol addiction, your drug addiction, that habit that's hurting you, that pain that's been carrying around, that hurt that's so heavy on your life. One day you'll come back, you'll get that part worked out, and what'll happen? God will use you to help other people, because that's what he does. He never wastes a hurt. So then it continues, strengthen your brothers. But he replied, I love this. This is Peter's arrogance. I'm ready to go to prison and to death. Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times that you know me. And then just a few verses later, here's what's happening. Then seizing him, they led him away, talking about Jesus, and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance, and when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. Time out, by the way. There was only one other disciple there that we know of, and here's the deal. All the other disciples took off. I always give Peter credit. At least he was close by. At least he wasn't. But this is where his courage gives up. Here he goes. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, hey, this man was with him. But he denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. By the way, only Jesus can call his wife woman. You don't get to. Never look at a female and say, woman, and then give an answer that could be the last day of your life. Okay? Just a little advice. Young married couples, older married couples, don't start a sentence this way, okay? So that just shows you where Peter's at. Woman, I don't know him, he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, you are one of them. Man, I am not, Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow is with him, for he is Galilean. Now, I love this. We find out in another place that he basically cusses at this point. But he says he's Galilean. You know how they knew he was Galilean? Galilean was considered a country language. You could tell if a Galilean was close. Just like you can tell if somebody's from Alabama, my mom. And I get around my mom and everybody's like, you were talking Southern today. I'm like, I know, she's near me. I heard a tape of me as a child. Hey, y'all, how you doing? It really sounded like that. You get around country people and you talk country. There was a guy on Jeopardy this week that was a hillbilly. I couldn't believe it. I mean, to hear somebody saying hypotenuse. Hypotenuse. It was weird. It was like, you can be smart and hillbilly? That's how they felt about the Galileans. They felt like the Galileans weren't as sharp as other people. They were kind of the hillbillies of town. And so she says, you're a Galilean. I can tell from your accent. What do you mean? What kind of accent do I got? Blood on the saddle. Now it's remember me. Just as he was speaking, he says, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. And listen to this. You may have never noticed this. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And this word for looked is not just glance. It's not notice. It's this idea in the Greek of a deep look. And I don't know if you've ever let somebody down and gotten that look. I remembered as a kid, my dad had my grandfather's watch and it wasn't ticking, and I shook it and it would tick, and I go, Dad, look, it's ticking. And I dropped it and broke the watch. By the way, this morning I realized my last really good gift that my dad liked to him was a G-Shock watch. And I thought, I wonder if I did that on purpose. That's weird. I gave my dad an unbreakable watch. I still have it, by the way. Got cement all over it. Jesus looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you'll disown me 3 times. Now listen to this. And he went outside and wept bitterly. What happened? Anger, anger, anger. Trying to push away how he was feeling. Trying to push away the fact that he was being asked and he was walking away. And then suddenly he went, oh. And he grieved over his failure. Some of you who were hurt as children need to recognize that what you experienced was not normal. And maybe instead of pushing against it all the time, it's time to grieve over what happened to you, or what you dealt with, or how you even failed. Maybe you made a mistake and messed up, and it's okay sometimes to go, or to even recognize that somebody else failed in your life. And weeping helps us to recognize what we're really dealing with. So what do we need to do? Confess your failures to Jesus. Now let me tell you the good news. Here's what's really cool. When you mess up, when you fail, when you falter, you struggle with alcohol, you struggle with drug addiction, you struggle with a habit, you struggle with anger, whatever you struggle with. Here's what's really cool. When I taught school, one of my favorite things to do, and I was talking to Danielle, she was one of my students years and years ago, your mom. One of the things I used to love to do is I would say pop quiz, which in junior high, if you want to have a fun, say those words and watch the reaction of the students. That was my favorite part, is to watch students go, throw their pen down 12 times, you know. And I do the quiz, and I made the quiz so hard, it was terrible. And I could hear the kids, every question. And then I said these words. All right, pass your paper to the back, person in the back, pass it to the front. Do you remember that, when you could do that? And I said, we're going to grade each other's papers. Oh, embarrass me. So I'd say, number 1, here's the answer. Now I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write the correct answer next to the wrong answer. If they got the wrong answer, I want you to write the correct answer next to it. And then we get to the end of the test and I go, now I want you to cross out every wrong answer and give the person 100%. You could have heard the Hallelujah chorus in that room. Oh, because even the smart kids missed a couple. That was on purpose. I was mean. But then all of a sudden they were like, Mr. B's the best teacher ever. Ever. Why? Because I bribed them. What's my goal? Now here's the deal. It's exactly what Jesus does for you. You missed all the questions. You messed up over and over. You thought you were getting them right, and you did it for the wrong reason. Guess what? And what does he do? He trades your sin for his righteousness. He gives you the right answer. So when you get to heaven, you don't say to God, hey, look at all the good I did. Let me in. No, you say, I'm with him. You go, oh, okay. Number 3. The sorrow of being attacked. So have you been betrayed? Have you failed? Have you been falsely attacked? So I knew this would be a heavy message, so I thought, what's the funniest thing that I was ever accused of that was just silly? And I'll never forget, years ago, 30-something years ago, I was in a little church. I was the youth pastor, and they asked me to do a skit. And I did a skit, this is how long ago it was, on Shaquille O'Neal, who played at that time for the Orlando Magic. And so over and over, I yelled, go Shaq. Over and over, 6, 7, 8 times. About 3 or 4 weeks later, a group of ladies came to me. One was the in charge, and the other ladies came with in the back there. And they said, we've been talking about you during our Sunday school. I thought, well, I don't know what that means. This was my first experience with that. I'm like, really? Okay. And they said, we can't believe that you were cussing in church. And I was trying to think of what I said. I thought maybe they were country women like my mama, who if you say the word for be quiet the wrong way, she considers that a cuss word. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not going to say it. I'll get in trouble. Even today, she's probably watching. I heard somebody say it. Be careful. Mama will find you. So I thought maybe that's, and I said, what are you talking about? And they said the word. They said the word, the really bad word they thought I said. They thought when I said go, I was yelling bull. Now you get it? Okay. I'm trying to keep it PG. I'm sorry. All right. So here's the thing. As soon as I realized what they said, I laughed, like out loud in somebody's, which is never a good answer. So of course I said, that is not what I said. And I told her what I said, and here's what she said. That's not true. I said, what do you mean it's not true? I mean, so you think that I did that 7 times and the pastor was laughing behind me? That's an awesome story. I should do that story. There's certain words when you're up here you have to be careful saying, by the way. Denise, you said one this morning. Where are you at? Yeah, we have it recorded. We'll show you. I actually had somebody say, what'd she just say? I said, it wasn't go Shaq. It wasn't, it's okay. But the truth is, here's the deal. At some point, almost everybody's been accused falsely. I know somebody really well who was put in jail on a false accusation that, thank God, the person confessed they lied. But if they hadn't, maybe you've never gone that far, but maybe somewhere in between. Maybe somebody accused you, and it still hurts to think about. Listen to what happens next. The men who were guarding Jesus, listen, began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him, demanding, prophesy, who hit you? And they said many other insulting things to him. At daybreak, the council of the elders, the people, both the chief priests, the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. If you're the Messiah, they said, tell us. Jesus answered, if I tell you, you will not believe me. By the way, you ever been in that position that no matter what you say, it's held against you? And if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God. By the way, there's another place where these religious leaders later go to Herod and they basically say, he says he's the Son of God. They all asked, are you then the Son of God? He replied, you say that I am. Then they said, why do we need any more testimony? We've heard it from his own lips. Now, I don't know if you've ever been attacked, falsely or even for a real thing. I've had people yell at me for being distracted. Exactly. I've had people yell at me for not paying enough attention. They thought I wasn't paying attention to them because I didn't look like they look. You ever been attacked, maybe for who you are? Maybe you had somebody say, you're always like that. Jesus knows what that's like. And so what do you need to do? Remember that God knows the truth and is working. And let me tell you good news and bad news. The good news is God knows the truth. So when you say something and you mean it a certain way, but it gets taken another way, God knows the truth. But the bad news is God knows the truth. So that time that somebody took what you said a good way and you didn't mean it a good way, He knows that too. He knows that time that you came up and said, Pastor, that was a great sermon. And then got in the car and went, that was the worst sermon I've ever heard. He knows the truth. He knows the truth. I've talked to people over the years that are carrying around heavy weights. There's things, sorrows, hurts, failures, betrayals they're carrying around. And here's what I want you to do. Take the duct tape off. If you've never dealt with it, ask God, Lord, help me to see that clearly. Maybe if it's something that you saw or experienced as a child, that you look at it through new eyes as an adult and say, would I ever let that happen? What would I do if I was the adult? Or what would I do if I saw that happening to, how would I act in that situation? Just to help you to walk through it, to take the Band-Aid off. But the main thing to realize is, Jesus gives you the answers. Because He died on the cross and rose again, He took on all your pain, all your sorrow, all your suffering. And that's why in heaven there's no more sorrow, no more pain, no more death, no more hurt, no more goodbyes. This world will always have all of those things. But one day, because of the death and resurrection of Jesus, we will live in eternity with peace and joy, forgiveness and love. If you're here today and you've never given your life to Jesus Christ, you can do that today. You can take that step to live in eternity with Him and to know Him because He loves you and cares about you. He will give you all the right answers, even when you fail. He gives you His righteousness. So if you want to do that today, I'd love to talk to you after the service about what it means to be a Christian. If you've been a Christian a long time, but some of these things hit home with you, just deal with them. Don't just put them on the shelf. Don't just put them in a closet. Say, God, I want to deal with that the right way. And my prayer is that you'll begin to take those steps and let God bring you healing. Let's close in prayer. Would you join me? Father, thank you for this time today. Thank you for your word. I thank you for your love for us. Lord, I thank you that you know sorrow even more than we ever will. Lord, there's folks in here today that are dealing with pain that I can't even imagine. They're dealing with sorrow and hurt that I can't even imagine. I pray that you would be with them today. Lord, I pray too, if anyone here doesn't know you, today would be the day they surrender to you. In Jesus' name, amen.